When someone barges into your private property, you expect it to be a burglar, maybe a nosy neighbor at worst. But for Mark, a quiet weekend at his lake cabin took a jaw-dropping turn when the one storming through his front door wasn't a thief, it was the HOA president, better known in the neighborhood as Karen. And the timing couldn't have been more unbelievable because sitting across the table from him, mid-conversation, was none other than the state attorney general. Mark had owned his lake cabin for nearly 10 years. It was his sanctuary, a quiet place away from the noise of the city, somewhere he could fish, read, and enjoy nature without interruptions. Over the years, he had dealt with his fair share of neighborhood politics from the local homeowners association, but for the most part, he stayed under the radar. He paid his dues, kept his property in order, and avoided unnecessary confrontations. But there was one person who seemed to have made it her life's mission to keep tabs on him, the HOA president, known by most neighbors as Karen. Her real name was Denise, but her reputation for nitpicking rules, overstepping boundaries, and acting as if she had personal ownership over the community earned her the nickname. Mark had heard stories from other homeowners, how she would take pictures of their yards to document violations, send lengthy emails about unsightly lawn chairs, or demand that people repaint their mailboxes if she thought the color was fading. She was relentless, but until that weekend, Mark had never been directly in her crosshairs in a serious way. That weekend was different. The state attorney general had agreed to visit Mark's cabin for a private meeting. It wasn't a casual social call. There was an ongoing investigation into corruption within certain HOA boards across the state. Mark had been asked to provide documents and first-hand information. He had been gathering evidence for months, emails, meeting transcripts, financial records, and the attorney general wanted to review them in person. Mark felt a mix of nerves and relief that morning. The attorney general's visit was discreet, no entourage, no flashing lights. Just a professional conversation over coffee at his kitchen table. He wanted the meeting to be productive and uninterrupted. And then came the sound, the sudden slam of his cabin door being thrown open. No knock, no call from outside, just the jarring sound of someone entering without permission. Standing in the doorway was Karen, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, voice already raised before Mark could say a word. She launched into a barrage of accusations. According to her, Mark had been in violation of several HOA rules for months. She claimed his cabin's deck railing was non-compliant, that his boat was parked improperly on the shore, and most bizarrely, that his use of a cabin that weekend was unauthorized because it was being reserved for a community event. The attorney general, still seated at the table, watched in silence for a moment, his eyebrows lifting in visible disbelief. Mark stood, keeping his composure, and reminded Karen that she had no right to enter his property without consent. She brushed off his words, insisting that as HOA president, she had authority to inspect, whenever she deemed it necessary. The attorney general spoke up for the first time. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Ma'am, do you realize you just entered private property without permission during an official meeting with a state government official?" Karen froze for a split second but quickly recovered, claiming she didn't know who he was. She argued that the HOA rules superseded any personal property rights within the community. That statement was a red flag to the attorney general. Mark could see the shift in the attorney general's demeanor. What was supposed to be a focused conversation about HOA corruption now had a live, unfiltered example unfolding in real time. The attorney general asked Karen to clarify her position. She repeated that as president, she had full authority to enter homes in the community to ensure compliance. When pressed to cite the specific law or rule that gave her that right, she stumbled, then resorted to saying it's common practice. Mark knew this was going to get interesting. The attorney general asked her to sit down. To Mark's surprise, she did. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable exchanges Mark had ever witnessed. The attorney general explained, point by point, that HOA authority does not override state property laws. He informed her that unauthorized entry into a private residence was not only a civil violation, but could carry criminal consequences. He asked if she had done this to other homeowners. Karen, perhaps realizing too late that she was speaking to the state's top law enforcement official, hesitated but eventually admitted she had checked on other properties the same way. Mark sat quietly, letting the Attorney General take the lead. The conversation shifted into investigative mode. The Attorney General began asking her questions about HOA finances, how fines were issued, and whether certain homeowners were targeted more than others. Karen's defensive tone only dug her deeper. She contradicted herself several times, claiming the HOA board acted by the book, but then admitting there were no formal records for some of their enforcement actions. By the time the Attorney General stood to leave, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Karen's confidence had evaporated. She avoided eye contact, mumbling about misunderstandings and just trying to do her job. After she left, the Attorney General turned to Mark and shook his head. "I came here to talk about patterns of abuse of power within HOAs," he said. "And I think we just witnessed one firsthand." Mark handed over the documents he had prepared, along with notes from other homeowners who had shared their experiences. The Attorney General assured him the matter would be taken seriously and that his office would be in touch soon. Over the next few weeks, Mark heard from neighbors who said Karen had been noticeably quiet. She had stopped her usual rounds of inspections and wasn't sending out her frequent violation notices. Then the official letter came. The Attorney General's office had launched a formal investigation into the HOA board's practices, citing concerns about unauthorized property entry, misuse of funds, and selective enforcement of rules. Karen was removed from her position, pending the outcome of the investigation. For Mark, it was a sense of relief, not just for himself, but for the entire community. Years of overreach, intimidation, and rule-bending were finally coming to light. He didn't take pleasure in seeing someone publicly humiliated, but he believed in accountability. If someone was using a position of authority to bully others, they needed to be stopped. Looking back, Mark couldn't help but think about the timing of it all. If the Attorney General hadn't been there that day, Karen's intrusion might have just been another frustrating incident that went nowhere. But because she stormed in at that exact moment, in front of the state's top legal authority, her behavior was documented in real time. No denial, no revision, no way to spin the story later. It was, in a strange way, poetic justice. The lake cabin remained Marquez peaceful retreat. The HOA, now under new leadership, began operating more transparently. Rules were still enforced, but with fairness and respect for homeowner rights. The evident intimidation tactics were gone. And Karen, she kept a low profile. Word was that she had moved out of the community altogether. For Mark, the incident was a reminder that sometimes the best way to expose abuse of power is simply to let it reveal itself. And on that day, it advocated right through his door uninvited while the one person who could hold it accountable sat watching from across the table.